If the goal is to get all kids to the same place, that place is going to necessarily be a lot lower than higher. That's why these things don't work. Let schools figure it out. Empower schools to do it. And so, one last brief history lesson, and then we coast to the end of the presentation. The Common Core, because one of the other things I want to do, besides exploding the ridiculous talking points, and I know you see this now, right? You can't do Common Core in 20 minutes. You can't do talking point versions of Common Core. That's what the left does. Here's a couple bullet points. It's state-led, it's governor-led, it's standards, not curriculum. All right, and they pass this out in the schools, and what percentage of our moms and dads who just read that think, oh, okay, that's fine. This whole thing was dug deep. It was widely thought out. It is conspiratorial how it was done behind closed doors. You can't do this in 5 minutes. And the other thing I'd like to do, besides blowing up all those myths and showing you what Common Core really is I would like to deconstruct some of this stuff as well. The idea that Common Core was transparent or open, if this is such a good thing, why is it cloaked in so much mislabeling, secrecy, lying, deceit? You know, people like me and Josh Katz and hundreds of others of us are touring the country lecturing about why Common Core is bad. Where do you go to hear a pro-Common Core speech? You know what you can't? You know how often we've begged them to stand on stage with us and debate us? If what we're doing is so transparently wrong, it should be the easiest thing in the world to poke holes in what we do. They will not debate it. They will not do talks like this for you. They will not come out in public. And when you try to talk to them in the schools that your kids go to, they will not let you talk to them collectively. They will not open up the auditorium, bring 100 moms and dads, and no, one by one they'll let you come in. Do you know Ari Duncan sent a memo to all American schools saying, do not talk to people collectively about Common Core. Insist on talking to them, because if they bring you into the superintendent's office, your mom or a dad, they bring you into the principal's office and isolate you from everybody else who doesn't like Common Core, then they tell you, right, we're not getting any complaints, this is your problem, right? It's intimidation. If this is so good, it should be easy enough to prove. Well, Common Core did one other disgusting thing that you might be tempted to think was a good thing. Way back in 2009-10, when they had written the standards, they created a panel called the Validation Committee. They brought in a bunch of people, paid a bunch of people to come in and look at the standards, and if they weren't any good, throw them out. Or they get complete carte blanche to change, to throw the standards away, to start over, tear them up and start over, whatever they wanted to do. Interestingly, on this committee of 29, they only brought in one expert of English and one expert of math. That's it. They brought in a bunch of activists, they brought in some low-level middle school and high school teachers, and again, please recognize what I'm telling you. If you teach high school geometry, that's great. We need good high school geometry teachers. But a high school geometry teacher does not have enough math to be able to assess a national standard. There were only 2 people on the committee who could. 2. The math professor is a guy by the name of Professor James Milgram, a Stanford University math professor, retired. He's serious. This is the guy that Milgram did much of the math calculations for the Apollo moonshot in the late 60s. He's got that kind of math. And he said of Common Core, by the way, he voted no. To throw them out entirely, he said. He said, quote, it's an absolute joke to think that Common Core math will prepare your kids for college-level math or even for STEM careers. Science, technology, engineering, and math, it won't do it. The English professor was Dr. Sandy Stotsky. She's been to your state a couple times already. And Sandy is considered to be the foremost ELA specialist for developmental kids in the country. She also voted no. By the way, Stotsky and Milgram are both Democrats. Stotsky also voted no. And she said, quote, the new standards in English and reading will set our kids 2 years behind the rest of the world when it comes to reading and reading and English comprehension. These 2 experts convinced other people on the panel to vote no. And do you know what happened? The Common Core Committee just kind of wrote them out of the final document and validated anyway. Simply removes them, their paid experts, from the discussion and validated with the people who were for it. That's what happened. And when you talk to your administrators about this, they're just standards. Let's talk about the standards. They're not going to talk to you about this. So that's why Stotsky and Milgram are both traveling the country warning people of what this junk is. So this comes directly from standards. Here's what my second definition of Common Core. Look at Common Core as a stool. And a stool needs 3 legs to stand or it's going to fall. Each of the 3 legs is equally valuable because you pull one out, the thing collapses. Here are the 3 legs. You've seen them. 1, the federal government. The only reason it's in your schools, bribing states to take it and blackmailing states who don't want it or want to get out of it. The federal government, the Common Core people, and then the textbooks companies, the publishers. These 3 things are what Common Core is, and you cannot separate them or the whole thing collapses. So having taken that into account, this comes directly from Sandy. Well, we know in Common Core English, right, through the text, the only thing we have to teach in the textbooks, that Common Core, up to 50% in Common Core English of the literature that our kids have historically read in classrooms is being pulled in favor of informational texts, much of which comes directly from the federal government. So as Sandy points out, our kids, when you read the great classics, whether it's Huckleberry Finn or Hamlet or the Odyssey, you don't know what Homer's politics were. You don't know if Homer was a Democrat or a Republican. You read great literature because you involve with ideas and concepts. And when you put your kids to bed at night, why do you read them stories that make their little eyelids flutter and their hearts pound? If you want to put kids to bed at night, shouldn't you read them a Bill Gates computer manual? I mean, wouldn't that put them right out? But you don't, because you know that we know that kids learn how to read and love reading through stories. Much of that storytelling is being yanked out and being replaced by government propaganda. Here's some examples. They're called informational texts. By the time your daughter's in 9th grade English, she'll be exposed to things like recommended levels of insulation, a report released in 2010 by the EPA and the Department of Energy. I've read it. It's a 40-page regulatory manual that simply talks about the environmentally correct way to insulate a building. Is this the kind of stuff that's going to make your kid want to read? And all of it, as Sandy points out, is one-sided government leftist propaganda. She says about 40%, you can see them online, about 40% of the informational texts deal with man-made global warming. Nothing contradicts it, it's all for it. And almost every one of these global warming texts blames America in a vacuum. They don't talk about the global problem, assuming one even exists. They don't talk about it. They don't cite other countries that pollute. The warming, the climate damage is exclusively portrayed as an American problem. The last little essay, how about that one by the time your kid's a sophomore? The evolution of the grocery bag. A long essay, and a spoiler alert, paper and plastic are both bad, and America's destroying the planet. How about this? How about your kids are going to be reading, instead of great works of literature now, they're going to be reading President Obama's own executive orders in Common Core English. Executive Order 13423, Strengthening Federal Environmental, Energy, and Transportation Management. And as Sandy points out, you're getting much more indoctrination within text because the federal government is handing what kids are going to read to teachers. Without any balance, and you can't bring in, if you're in a Common Core classroom, as teachers are finding out because of the test, you can't bring in an essay to challenge that. It'll never appear on the tests. More informational text, less classic literature, we also know, and it's common sense. Kids learn how to write well only after they learn how to read well. When you go to learn a foreign language, you don't start by writing it. But at every single grade level, Common Core English lowers the overall level of reading by 50%. And elevates the level of writing by 50%. Kids are writing more than they're reading. And if you're not reading anything except government propaganda, what do you think you're going to be writing about all the time? That's it. Maybe that's why we got that very famous viral example that a couple months ago, right, where little kids were sent home with the third graders. They were sent home with the assignment to write an essay. How is the state just like the family, but better? Right? Or that's where you get essays like Hitler versus Bush. Common Core, they did a little module on how, the only thing they told the kids about George Bush was how he lied to get us into Iraq. That's all they said. And then they showed how Hitler lied to create World War II. The kids were sent home with an assignment, right? Here's what the assignment read. Now that you've seen two powerful men who lied and abused their power, compare George Bush and Adolf Hitler. This is what you're doing. Here's my second debit. You give me one, so I've given you two already. Common Core is a stool with three legs. Common Core is an alliance between a very small group of capitalists, not crony capitalists, not free market capitalists, and the federal government. Here's the third definition of Common Core, and I think it's an important one. If you give me just one word to define what it is, that word would be statism. The entire premise of all of this is not to educate your kids. Not first and foremost, it's not. It is to convince your kids that they belong first and foremost to the state. Not to you, not to your families, not to your local communities, certainly not to your religious traditions, but to them. All of this subordinates that. And math, it's the same thing with math. Oh, I'm sorry, before we go leave English. And of that little bit of literature, relatively speaking, that's left in Common Core, why is so much of it sexually inappropriate, graphic, violent? Why, of what little literature is left in Common Core, as you heard the liberal Kat say, as you heard the liberal Lewis say, why is so much of it so shockingly developmentally inappropriate? Here's an example. This is Toni Morrison's The Biggest Eye. Morrison is a great writer. She's a Nobel Prize winner. But we wouldn't assign this book to freshmen in college. It's about a 12-year-old girl who's a victim of rape and incest. And over the course of the novel, she comes to bond with her rapist so much that she starts describing in graphic detail the nature of their sexual encounters. This book has been pulled out of middle school classrooms, 8th graders, Catholic 8th graders, reading this book in Common Core textbooks. I blocked out the worst words. You may not be able to read it. It's probably just as well. But if you can get a quick sense of just what middle schoolers, adolescents are reading in Common Core. And as Sandy points out, Sandy Stotsky, there are dozens and dozens of books like this, equally graphic. Books like Black Swan, Dreaming in Cuban, that are Common Core exemplar texts. And for the youngest kids, they're not reading hardcore pornography like this, but they're reading things just as bad. How about that assignment that came out just a couple weeks ago, where kids were, a group of kids, I think they were 4th graders, were sent home with a paragraph, 8-sentence paragraph, 4th graders. They had to read the paragraph and then write what the theme was, a sensible argument, get kids to read a paragraph and see if they can figure out what it means. Well, here's how the paragraph for 4th graders began. Janie's mom came home from work early one day. Janie's mom found that the family bed wasn't made. As Janie's mom set about making the bed, she found a hair beret between the sheets that wasn't hers. 8 sentences later, 4th graders had to conclude that Dad was having an adulterous affair in Mom's bed for 4th graders. Even math questions have been skewed. Even math now has been sexualized in the way they ask the questions. How about that famous example from a little while ago in Detroit, Michigan, where little kids were doing a ratio assignment? I think they were 3rd or 4th graders too. They were doing, they were 6th graders. They were doing a ratio assignment, percentages. And there was a little stick figure drawing of a woman and 3 little stick figure drawings of men. The woman was sleeping with all 3 men. So the students in 6th grade had to determine the percentage of which of the 3 men were the baby daddy. And they used the word baby daddy. Why are math? Remember what I said to you about math? If math, we've been doing math the same way for 2,000 years. What are you doing when you change it? You're not changing the math. All you're changing is this aspect of it, the sociology accompanied with it. Sandy says, right, we need to explore why. Why so many of these exemplar readings are out of place. Not just in the subject area Common Core puts them, but in a high school curriculum altogether. What are they doing there? And in talking to Professor Milgram about math, we're at number 9. Let's do number 10. Let's blow up the 10th Common Core myth. Well, Common Core math has been internationally benchmarked. That we've met, do you know, and you keep hearing this from your schools and your politicians. Milgram showed up at the committee and he said, okay, you keep saying that Common Core math, you measured it against all the high-achieving math countries. What countries? And so they handed him a list, right? Sweden, South Korea, Taiwan, all the countries where kids really, really do excel at math. And Milgram said, great, now let me see your math. How did you do it? For the entire month he was on that committee, nobody ever presented the slightest piece of evidence, none, zero, that this had ever been benchmarked by anything. Matter of fact, as you sit here today, 5 years into Common Core, the government has produced no evidence, none, that any of this was ever measured against anything. It's one of the reasons Milgram voted no. Sandy said, we were convinced on the committee that all they did was write down names of countries. There is no evidence. Your kids are guinea pigs. None of this has ever been tested anyway. Right? It's one of the reasons Milgram voted no. So in talking to Professor Milgram, we got to talking. Professor, if this is not primarily about teaching kids math, what is it? His words, this is social justice math. It's not fair that only a small percentage of kids can do math at a high level, and hasn't that always been true? I mean, let's face reality here, right? You're not going to turn most American kids into math whizzes. We all should have a competent math background, I agree. I didn't even get that. But the fact remains is that most kids aren't going to do math at the level you're going to need to do it to be an engineer or an architect or even a doctor. Most kids aren't going to do that math. At the universities I've taught at, you know where my English majors mostly come from? Pre-med kids who couldn't do the math and had to drop out of the doctor program, right? That's the reality. If math is hard. But that's unfair. It's socially unjust that only some kids can do math. So we've created a math program, a math curriculum, where everybody knows a very little math and nobody's allowed to succeed or excel at math. Pointing to this, Professor Milgram says, here's some evidence for it. This young woman, and you cannot make this up, she's a community activist organizer in Chicago. And she's talking to a group of Illinois high school math teachers about the philosophy of Common Core math.
Or even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and oral explanation, and they showed it in the picture, but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the way.
Right. Philosophically, right answers don't matter as much as the process. One of the primary ways Common Core is being taught, math is being taught at elementary levels, is the Parent Share program, where teachers who are facilitators, they don't teach.